Have you ever paused to think about how close you've been to danger without even knowing it? We guide you through these intense moments, one story at a time. But before you get lost in the narrative, take a moment to like this video and share where you're tuning in from. Now, let's immerse ourselves in these spine-tingling tales. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to watch my latest videos as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. The Ghost of the White Dress on Interstate I-90. There are few stories as chilling as the legend of the White Lady of Resurrection Cemetery. Her story has been whispered for decades, shared between truckers at rest stops, passed down by local families, and retold to scare late-night drivers along Interstate 90 in Illinois. Though the exact details vary, the essence of the story remains the same: a tragic death, a restless spirit, and a terrifying encounter that haunts drivers to this day. It was a cold October evening when Paul Sanderson, a young man working as a mechanic in Chicago, decided to visit his parents in a suburban town just outside of the city. The road was familiar. He had driven this route dozens of times before. The clock on his dashboard glowed 11:45 p.m. as he merged onto I-90. The darkness pressed heavily against his headlights, and the road stretched endlessly ahead of him. He turned up the radio to keep himself awake, tapping his fingers to the beat of a classic rock song. As he approached a long, deserted stretch of the highway near Resurrection Cemetery, Paul noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. The sight was unusual. There were rarely any pedestrians this far out, especially at this hour. He slowed his car as he drew closer and saw that it was a young woman. She was wearing a flowing white dress, the kind someone might wear to a formal dance or a wedding. Her hair was long and dark, cascading over her shoulders. She raised one hand, signaling for him to stop. Paul hesitated. His mother had always warned him about picking up strangers, but the woman looked desperate. She was shivering, and her eyes, though shadowed by the night, seemed filled with sorrow. Against his better judgment, he pulled over and rolled down the passenger side window. "Do you need help?" he asked. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Can you take me home? Where are you headed?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the road ahead. "Just down the highway, near the cemetery." Paul felt a chill run down his spine, but nodded. "Hop in." The woman opened the door and slid into the seat beside him. She sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as Paul pulled back onto the highway. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye. Her dress was immaculate, pristine white without a single stain or wrinkle, despite standing on the side of a dusty road. Her bare feet were pale, almost luminous in the dim light of the car. "What were you doing out there all alone?" Paul asked, trying to break the silence. "I was waiting," she replied, her voice distant. "Waiting for what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze to the window, watching the trees and streetlights blur past. The air inside the car grew colder, and Paul felt goosebumps rise on his arms. He reached to adjust the heater, but it was already on full blast. They drove in silence for several miles until the Resurrection Cemetery came into view. The wrought iron gates loomed in the darkness, the name Resurrection cast in shadows across the archway. Paul slowed the car as they approached. "Is this where you need to get off?" he asked. The woman turned to him, her eyes now filled with an eerie, otherworldly light. "Thank you for the ride," she said softly. Before Paul could respond, she opened the door and stepped out. He watched in stunned silence as she walked toward the cemetery gates, her bare feet making no sound on the pavement. Just as she reached the entrance, she vanished. Paul blinked, his heart racing. He threw the car in a park and jumped out, running to where he had last seen her. There was no sign of the woman, no footprints, no disturbed gravel. The night was still, save for the rustling of leaves in the cold wind. Shaken, Paul returned to his car and drove home, his mind racing with questions. The next day, unable to shake the experience, he visited a local diner known for its ghost stories and urban legends. He described the encounter to an older man who sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee. "Ah," the man said, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "You met Resurrection Mary." "Resurrection Mary?" The man nodded. "She's been haunting that stretch of road for years. died in a car accident after a dance back in the 1930s. People say she's looking for a way home, but she never quite makes it. Paul felt a shiver run down his spine. So, she's real? As real as the road you drove on, the man replied. You're not the first to see her, and you won't be the last. Years later, Paul still thinks about that night on I-90. He no longer drives that route after dark, and he never picks up hitchhikers, especially not women in white dresses. The haunting of the killer truck on Route 66. Route 66, known as the Main Street of America, stretches from Chicago to Santa Monica and carries with it a storied past of adventure and discovery. Yet hidden among its charming diners and scenic byways lies a darker legend. The tale of the Phantom Truck, a terrifying specter that has haunted drivers for decades. This story has been passed from generation to generation, a cautionary tale warning night travelers of the dangers lurking along the historic highway. A night of terror. It was a crisp autumn evening when Lisa Matthews set out on a solo road trip from Albuquerque, New Mexico, to St. Louis, Missouri. She had always been fascinated by Route 66 and dreamed of traveling its entire length. Her vintage red convertible cruised smoothly along the highway as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The road ahead was empty, stretching into the darkening landscape. Lisa enjoyed the solitude and freedom of the open road. The hum of her engine and the rhythmic thump of her tires on the pavement created a soothing melody that lulled her into a relaxed state. She rolled down her window, letting the cool breeze whip through her hair as she sang along to the oldies playing on her radio. As the miles slipped by, the isolation of the highway grew more pronounced. There were no streetlights, no other cars, and no signs of civilization. The darkness seemed to swallow her whole, with only her headlights cutting through the night. A strange sense of unease began to creep into her mind. She dismissed it as fatigue and turned up the volume on the radio. Suddenly, her rearview mirror caught a glimmer of light in the distance. Headlights! Lisa felt a wave of relief. She wasn't alone after all. The lights grew brighter, and soon a large truck loomed behind her, its massive grille reflecting the beams of her taillights. The truck was moving fast, too fast. What the hell? Lisa muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The truck roared closer, its headlights glaring into her rearview mirror. She squinted, the blinding light making it hard to see. The truck honked a long, deep blast that echoed in the empty night. It was right on her bumper, practically pushing her down the road. Panicking, Lisa accelerated. Her car sped up, the engine revving loudly as she tried to put distance between herself and the truck. But the monstrous vehicle stayed with her, its engine growling like a predator chasing prey. She glanced at the mirror again and noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of its headlights was out. The pursuee. Legends of the one-eyed truck flashed through Lisa's mind. Stories told of a phantom truck that terrorized drivers along desolate stretches of Route 66. It appeared out of nowhere, chasing down its victims and forcing them off the road. Survivors described the truck as ancient, its paint chipped and rusted, with only one working headlight. No one knew who or what drove it. Lisa's heart raced as fear gripped her chest. Her foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, the convertible speeding dangerously along the winding road. The truck stayed close, its horn blaring relentlessly. She swerved to the right, hoping to let it pass, but it followed her every move, blocking her from changing lanes. "Leave me alone," she shouted, her voice trembling. The truck suddenly pulled up beside her, its towering frame casting a shadow over her car. Lisa turned her head and gasped. Behind the cracked windshield, she could see a figure, a driver whose face was obscured by darkness. The eyes, however, burned like embers, glowing red with an otherworldly light. The sight sent a jolt of terror through her veins. The truck swerved sharply, slamming into the side of Lisa's car. Metal screeched as sparks flew. She fought to keep control, her tires skidding on the pavement. Desperately, she jerked the steering wheel, managing to pull away from the monstrous vehicle. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape. She remembered a rest area a few miles ahead. If she could reach it, she might find safety or at least a place to hide. The truck's horn blasted again, shaking her to the core. Hashtag, 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 a narrow escape. Lisa spotted the rest area sign just in time. She veered onto the exit ramp, her tires screeching as she braked hard. The truck barreled past, its horn blaring one final time before vanishing into the darkness. She sat in her car, shaking, her heart pounding like a drum. The parking lot was empty, save for a flickering streetlight casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. She locked her doors and gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. For several minutes, there was only silence. No sign of the truck, no sound of an engine, just the wind rustling through the trees. Lisa exhaled a shaky breath and reached for her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's a truck, Lisa stammered. It chased me down Route 66. It tried to run me off the road. The operator asked her for details. Lisa described the truck, the rusted body, the one working headlight, and the terrifying driver with glowing eyes. There was a pause. Ma'am, the operator said slowly. Are you sure it wasn't just a normal vehicle? No, it wasn't normal. It was something else. Another pause. Then, in a quieter tone, the operator said, You're not the first to call about that truck. Stay where you are. An officer will be dispatched to check on you. Hashtag, 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 a haunting memory. Lisa waited, her heart thudding in her chest. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, a patrol car arrived. The officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stepped out and approached her. You're lucky, he said after hearing her story. Many people who see that truck don't make it out. What is it? She whispered. Who drives it? The officer shook his head. No one knows. Some say it's the ghost of a trucker who died on this highway long ago. Others think it's something darker, a force that preys on the lost and lonely. Lisa never drove Route 66 alone again. The memory of the one-eyed truck and its relentless pursuit haunted her dreams for years. And though many dismissed her story as just another highway legend, she knew the truth. That somewhere, out there in the darkness, the phantom truck still prowled, waiting for its next victim. The ghostly soldier of Interstate I-70. Interstate 70 stretches across the heart of America, cutting through quiet rural landscapes, bustling cities, and, as some would claim, realms beyond the ordinary. In the state of Indiana, there is a legend that haunts a lonely stretch of this highway. The story of a ghostly soldier who appears to drivers in the dead of night. Many have recounted their encounters, and those who have experienced it firsthand swear it is no mere illusion. A journey into the past. It was a chilly November evening when Mark Henderson, a long-haul trucker, set out from Indianapolis heading west towards St. Louis. He had driven Interstate 70 countless times before, but this trip felt different. The air was thick with fog, curling like ghostly tendrils across the asphalt. His 18-wheeler rumbled steadily, headlights cutting through the mist. Mark adjusted the dial on his CB radio, listening to the static-filled chatter of other truckers. He had heard tales of strange things on I-70, stories shared in hushed tones over midnight coffee at truck stops. Stories of a soldier's ghost. Just old legends, he muttered to himself, shaking his head. As the miles passed, the road grew increasingly desolate. The fog thickened, swallowing the moonlight and making visibility poor. He yawned, fatigue beginning to creep into his limbs. Reaching for his thermos, he took a long sip of lukewarm coffee, hoping to chase away the drowsiness. Suddenly he saw it. A figure appeared in the middle of the road. Mark slammed on his brakes, tires screeching as he fought to bring the massive vehicle to a stop. The truck skidded, the trailer swaying dangerously. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the steering wheel, eyes wide with terror. The figure remained unmoving. It was a man, the soldier on the road. Mark's truck came to a halt just feet away from the man, who stood eerily still. He wore an old-fashioned military uniform, complete with a helmet and gear from the World War II era. The uniform was tattered and faded, and his boots were caked with mud. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but his eyes, those piercing eyes, seemed to glow faintly. "Are you insane?" Mark shouted, rolling down his window. "You could have gotten yourself killed." The soldier did not respond. He stared directly at Mark, unblinking, his expression unreadable. A deep sense of unease settled over the trucker as he realized something was profoundly wrong. There were no signs of breath in the cold night air. No movement. No sound. Then, without a word, the soldier lifted one hand and pointed down the highway. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The soldier continued to point, his gesture slow and deliberate. Mark's eyes followed the direction of the hand, but he saw only darkness and the faint outline of the highway stretching into the fog. When he turned back, the soldier was gone. A warning from beyond. Mark sat frozen in his seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He scanned the road, his heart thundering in his chest. The soldier had vanished, disappearing as if he had never been there. Shaking his head, he muttered, "I must be more tired than I thought." He restarted his truck and pulled back onto the highway, but the sense of unease lingered. He couldn't shake the image of the soldier's face, the haunting intensity of his gaze. The road ahead felt darker, more oppressive. Minutes later, as he rounded a sharp curve, his headlights illuminated a horrific sight. A multi-car accident blocked the highway. Vehicles crumpled like paper, glass shattered across the pavement, and smoke billowing into the foggy air. Mark slammed on his brakes once more, bringing his truck to a screeching halt just in time to avoid the wreckage. He jumped out of his cab and rushed to the nearest vehicle. A man was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious but breathing. Another car held a young woman frantically trying to free herself from a jammed seatbelt. "Hold on," Mark called, grabbing a tire iron from his truck. He pried the door open and helped her escape. She gasped for air, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, trembling. "I didn't think anyone would stop." Mark helped the other driver and called emergency services. As sirens wailed in the distance, he couldn't stop thinking about the soldier. Had it not been for that ghostly warning, he might have driven straight into the deadly pileup. An old legend lives on. In the days that followed, Mark tried to find answers. He spoke with fellow truckers and locals, sharing his encounter. Many nodded knowingly, their faces grave. "You saw him," one old-timer said. "The ghost soldier." "Who is he?" Mark asked. "No one knows for sure," the man replied, his voice low. "Some say he was a young soldier heading home on leave when he died in a crash during the war. His spirit never found peace. Now he walks the highway, warning others of danger ahead." Mark shivered. "Why did he help me?" "Because you listened," the old-timer said simply. "Not everyone does." From that night on, Mark never dismissed stories of the supernatural. He continued his long-haul trips, but he carried with him a newfound respect for the mysteries of the road. And every time he drove along I-70, he watched the shadows carefully, knowing that the ghost soldier might be watching too, a silent guardian, protecting those willing to heed his warning. If you enjoy spine-chilling stories and mysterious legends, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of my newest videos. Your support helps us bring more thrilling content your way. Join the adventure and be part of the community today.